Welcome back to our channel. Today we take a deep dive into the remarkable life and career of Norma Shearer, one of Hollywood's most influential and trailblazing stars. Known for her elegance, intelligence, and fearless approach to complex roles, Shearer shattered expectations and redefined what it meant to be a leading lady during Hollywood's golden age. From her early struggles to her rise as an Oscar-winning actress, and from her groundbreaking performances to her lasting impact on the industry, her journey is one of resilience, ambition, and undeniable talent. Join us as we explore the untold stories of Norma Shearer's career, personal life, and enduring legacy. Childhood. Norma Shearer's story didn't begin in the glamorous world of Hollywood, but in the thriving city of Montreal, Canada. Born Edith Norma Shearer on June 12, 1902, she was the youngest of 3 children in a well-to-do family. Her father, Andrew Shearer, was a successful businessman who ran a carpentry and lumber business that had been passed down through generations. With a steady income and a comfortable lifestyle, young Norma never had to worry about money, at least not in the beginning. Her mother, Edith Mary Fisher, was a woman ahead of her time. Unlike many mothers of the era who might have encouraged their daughters to pursue quiet, traditional lives, Edith had an artistic spirit and saw something special in her youngest child. This belief would later become the driving force behind Norma's career, shaping her into the ambitious, relentless actress the world would come to know. But wealth and privilege can be fleeting. And Norma's childhood took a dramatic turn when her father's business began to decline. The family's fortune crumbled due to an economic downturn, forcing them into financial hardship. Gone were the days of luxury. In their place came stress, uncertainty, and, eventually, heartbreak. Norma, once accustomed to comfort, was suddenly faced with the reality of sacrifice. At just 14 years old, she made the difficult decision to drop out of school, taking a job at a music store to help support her family. It was a harsh introduction to the struggles of adulthood, but rather than breaking her spirit, it ignited a fire within her. She refused to be a victim of circumstance. Even in the midst of financial turmoil, one thing remained constant: her dream of becoming a performer. That spark had been lit years earlier, in 1911, when she attended a vaudeville show for the first time. The energy, the lights, the grand spectacle, it was intoxicating. From that moment on, she knew that the stage was where she belonged. But with her father's business failing and tensions rising at home, Norma's path to stardom seemed impossible. Her parents' marriage suffered under the weight of their financial woes, and by 1920, it had reached its breaking point. Divorce was rare and scandalous at the time, but her mother, refusing to let their circumstances dictate their future, made a bold decision. She packed up Norma and her sister Athol and set off for New York, chasing the dream of a better life. Arriving in New York, she was a rude awakening. The city was nothing like the comfort of Montreal. Their new home was a cramped one-room apartment near a noisy railroad track with a shared bathroom down the hall. For someone who had grown up in luxury, this was a jarring change, but Norma didn't let it shake her resolve. She wasn't in New York to dwell on what she had lost. She was there to make something of herself. The hardships she faced only fueled her determination. She had already given up her education and her childhood comforts. She wasn't about to give up on her dreams, too. With her mother's unwavering support, Norma set her sights on show business. But dreams, as she would quickly learn, didn't come easily. The entertainment world was brutal, and in an industry that prized physical perfection, she found herself at an immediate disadvantage. Casting directors took one look at her and dismissed her as unfit for the screen. She was too short. Her figure was too broad. Worst of all, she was slightly cross-eyed, a flaw that she had been painfully aware of since childhood. Time and time again she was turned away, told She simply didn't have what it took to be a star. But Norma Shearer was not the type to accept defeat. She had already faced loss, hardship, and rejection, and she had survived them all. If Hollywood wasn't ready to accept her, she would make sure they had no choice. Her journey was just beginning. Second family Norma Shearer's journey to stardom might have been fueled by her own ambition, but behind that drive was the influence of two very different parental figures. Her father, Andrew Shearer, was once a prosperous businessman who owned a thriving lumber company in Montreal. In the early years of Norma's life, his success ensured that the family lived comfortably, free from financial worries. But wealth can be fleeting, and as economic conditions worsened, Andrew's business crumbled. The decline wasn't just financial. It tore the family apart. Once a respected and independent entrepreneur, he struggled to recover after selling the company, and his failure weighed heavily on him. For Norma, the father she had once known, strong, successful, and reliable, became a distant figure, both physically and emotionally. The marriage between Andrew and Edith Mary Fisher had already been strained, but the loss of financial security was the final blow. By the late 1910s, their home was no longer filled with the warmth of a successful household, but with tension, arguments, and an uncertain future. The eventual divorce in 1920 marked not just the legal separation of husband and wife, but also the beginning of a new chapter for Edith and her daughters. While Andrew remained in Canada, seemingly fading into the background of Norma's life, Edith took the reins and became the true architect of her daughter's destiny. Edith Mary Fisher was no ordinary woman. At a time when most women were expected to prioritize home and family over personal ambition, she was a force of nature, fiercely independent, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to see her daughters succeed. While Andrew saw only the decline of their fortunes, Edith saw an opportunity for reinvention. She refused to let their financial struggles define them, and when she looked at Norma, she saw more than just a young girl. She saw a star. Convinced that her daughters had a future in show business, she made the bold decision to uproot their lives and move to New York. It wasn't just a geographical shift. It was a declaration of defiance against the setbacks they had endured. She knew the entertainment industry was unforgiving, and that Norma, with her unconventional looks, would face an uphill battle. But if there was one thing Edith believed in, it was perseverance. Arriving in New York, Edith quickly took control of Norma's future with the precision of a stage mother who knew exactly what needed to be done. She enrolled Norma in acting and dance classes, introduced her to industry professionals, and tirelessly sought out opportunities for her daughter. She wasn't just a supportive mother, she was a strategist, constantly pushing Norma to be more ambitious, more confident, and more relentless in her pursuit of success. Even when Norma faced rejection after rejection, Edith never wavered. If one door closed, she found another one to knock on. If casting directors dismissed Norma's looks, she found ways to highlight her strengths. She wasn't merely guiding her daughter. She was shaping her into a fighter, someone who wouldn't back down in the face of adversity. Edith's influence on Norma's career can't be overstated. Without her, Norma might never have stepped foot in Hollywood, let alone become one of its most iconic leading ladies. But their relationship wasn't just about ambition. It was built on an unshakable belief that they were destined for something greater. Edith had lost everything once, and she wasn't about to let history repeat itself. If Hollywood wasn't ready for Norma Shearer, then Norma Shearer, under her mother's relentless guidance, would make sure Hollywood had no choice but to take notice. Third career, Norma Shearer's rise to fame was anything but easy. Unlike the overnight success stories of many Hollywood legends, Her journey was marked by relentless struggle, ruthless rejection, and an unshakable determination to prove her worth. When she moved to New York with dreams of becoming a star, she was met with a brutal reality. Hollywood, and the entertainment industry as a whole, was not built for women who didn't fit the traditional mold of beauty. Casting directors took one look at her and dismissed her outright. She was too short, her figure was too athletic, and worst of all, she had a slight cross-eye, something that, in the world of silent films where expressive eyes were everything, was considered a fatal flaw. Her first major rejection came from none other than Florenz Ziegfeld, the legendary Broadway impresario who had the power to turn young women into overnight sensations. She had managed to secure a formal letter of introduction to him, something most aspiring actresses would kill for. But when she finally stood before him, Ziegfeld barely gave her a second glance before cruelly dismissing her, allegedly calling her a dog and criticizing her looks without hesitation. For many, that kind of humiliation would have been the end, but not for Norma. Determined to find another way, she pushed herself into auditions, taking any small opportunity she could. Eventually, she landed a tiny role as an extra for Universal Pictures. Hardly a breakthrough, but it was a foot in the door. That opportunity led to a chance to work on Way Down East, a film directed by the legendary D.W. Griffith. Hoping this would be the moment that changed her life, she boldly approached Griffith and told him about her ambitions. His response? "You'll never make it." He told her she was all wrong for the screen. Her eyes were too cross, her legs were too short, and her torso was too long. Another door slammed shut. But Norma was not one to accept defeat. Realizing that if she couldn't change Hollywood's perception of beauty, she would change herself. She sought out Dr. William Bates, a well-known eye specialist. Through a combination of exercises and strategic lighting techniques, she learned how to minimize the appearance of her cross-eye on camera. It wasn't a complete fix, but it gave her an edge, one that she would soon use to her advantage. Her persistence finally paid off in 1923 when she caught the attention of Louis B. Mayer, the head of a small but growing film studio. Mayer saw something in her, a spark, an intelligence, a determination that made him believe she had potential. He signed her to a contract at $250 per week, and just like that, Norma Shearer was on her way to Hollywood. But signing a contract was only the first battle. When she arrived at the studio, she quickly realized that nothing would be handed to her. Directors dismissed her as unphotogenic, and her first screen test was a disaster. The harsh lighting made her cross-eye look even worse, and the footage was so unflattering that she feared her Hollywood career was over before it had even begun. But then, fate intervened. A cameraman at the studio noticed how distressed she was, and after listening to her concerns, agreed to reshoot the test with better lighting and angles. This time, it worked. She passed the test, and more importantly, she caught the eye of Irving Thalberg, the young and brilliant executive who was quickly making a name for himself in the industry. Thalberg saw beyond her imperfections. He recognized her intelligence, her adaptability, and her sheer will to succeed. Over the next few years, he became not just her mentor, but also her biggest advocate, carefully selecting roles that allowed her to prove her talent. By the late 1920s, Norma Shearer was no longer just another contract actress at MGM. She was a rising star. She made a seamless transition from silent films to talkies, something many of her contemporaries failed to do. In 1929, she starred in The Trial of Mary Dugan, MGM's first all-talking feature film. It was a massive success, proving that she had the voice, the screen presence, and the talent to thrive in the new era of Hollywood. Then came The Divorcee, 1930. the film that would define her career. The role was a risky one. She played a woman who, after discovering her husband's infidelity, decides to live by the same double standard men had enjoyed for centuries. It was bold, modern, and controversial, and Norma fought for it. She knew that audiences were ready for a new kind of leading lady, one who wasn't just a damsel in distress, but a woman with power, agency, and desire. Her gamble paid off. The film was a sensation, and she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, cementing her place as one of Hollywood's most formidable stars. From that point on, Norma Shearer was unstoppable. She embraced the pre-code era of Hollywood, taking on daring, sensual roles that challenged the traditional image of women on screen. In A Free Soul, 1931, she played a woman who openly pursued a passionate affair with a gangster played by Clark Gable. The film was so scandalous that it was banned in some countries, but it only added to her growing reputation as a fearless actress who wasn't afraid to push boundaries. Throughout the 1930s, she became one of MGM's biggest stars, competing with the likes of Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, and Jean Harlow. But while Garbo was the mysterious, unattainable goddess and Crawford the working-class fighter, Norma carved out a space all her own. She had elegance, intelligence, and a daring sensuality that made her unique. Her roles in Romeo and Juliet, 1936, and Marie Antoinette, 1938, proved that she could handle lavish, big-budget productions just as effortlessly as the bold modern dramas that had made her famous. But then, everything changed. In 1936, Irving Thalberg, the man who had guided her career, and by that time become her husband, died suddenly of pneumonia at just 37 years old. His death was more than just a personal loss, it was a professional one. Without Thalberg, Norma lost her most powerful supporter at MGM. She continued acting, but the industry was shifting. The rise of new, younger actresses made it harder for her to secure the kinds of roles she had once dominated. As the years went on, she made a series of career missteps, turning down roles that would later become legendary. She famously rejected the part of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, claiming she wasn't right for it. Instead, the role went to Vivien Leigh, who skyrocketed to fame. Other offers failed to materialize into successful films, and one by one, the opportunities faded. By the early 1940s, Norma saw the writing on the wall. Rather than fade into obscurity, she made the decision to retire on her own terms. Her final film, Her Cardboard Lover, 1942, was a box office disappointment. But by then it didn't matter. Norma had nothing left to prove. She had defied expectations, broken boundaries, and built a career on sheer determination. She had won an Oscar, become one of the most bankable stars of her time, and proven that women in Hollywood could be more than just pretty faces. They could be powerful, independent, and in control of their own destinies. And so after nearly 2 decades in the spotlight, Norma Shearer stepped away from Hollywood, leaving behind a legacy that, though often overshadowed by her contemporaries, remains one of the most inspiring stories in film history. Fourth, Scandal Hollywood in the 1930s was a battlefield, especially for actresses vying for the top spot. It wasn't just about talent, it was about power, connections, and knowing how to play the game. And Norma Shearer? She played it better than most. But success in Hollywood always comes with enemies. And for Norma, that meant facing fierce competition, backstage rivalries, and whispers that her achievements weren't entirely her own. One of the biggest thorns in her side was Joan Crawford, a woman who made no secret of her resentment toward Norma. Crawford, who had fought her way up from a poor background, despised the idea that Norma had what she called an unfair advantage. And to an extent, she wasn't entirely wrong. Norma was married to Irving Thalberg, the most powerful producer at MGM. To Crawford and many others, it seemed like Norma had a golden ticket to all the best roles simply because she was sleeping with the boss. Joan, who had clawed her way to stardom without any powerful benefactor, found this infuriating. She wasn't afraid to voice her opinions either, once famously saying, "How can I compete with Norma? She's married to the head of the studio." To her, every time Norma landed a leading role, it felt like another opportunity stolen from actresses who had to fight harder for recognition. But Joan Crawford wasn't the only rival gunning for Norma. Greta Garbo, MGM's other reigning queen, had an entirely different approach to competition. While Crawford was outspoken and fiery, Garbo was distant and aloof, but make no mistake, she was watching. The Swedish actress had an air of mystique and an undeniable magnetism that made her a box office powerhouse. While Norma was the studio's elegant, polished leading lady, Garbo was the untouchable, almost otherworldly star. Their rivalry wasn't as openly hostile as Norma's with Crawford, but there was always tension when it came to securing the best scripts and highest billing. Then there was Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde bombshell who redefined the idea of a sex symbol in the early 1930s. If Norma was sophisticated and refined, Harlow was bold, brash, and irresistible to audiences who craved a different kind of leading lady. While they rarely competed for the exact same roles, their images were so different that it forced Norma to constantly reinvent herself, proving that she could be just as daring and sensual as the younger actresses rising in popularity. But perhaps the most infamous incident in Norma Shearer's Hollywood career came in 1936, at one of the most exclusive and talked-about parties of the decade, the Mayfair Ball, hosted by Carole Lombard. Lombard, known for her razor-sharp wit and ability to command attention, had a very specific dress code for the evening. All women were to wear white. It was meant to create a sense of unity, elegance, and old Hollywood glamour. Most attendees, even the biggest stars, followed the rule, except for one. Norma Shearer arrived in a striking fire engine red gown, standing out like a beacon in a sea of white. The reaction was immediate. Some admired her audacity, seeing it as a power move from a woman who knew her worth. Others, including Carole Lombard herself, saw it as a deliberate act of defiance. Lombard was furious. According to rumors, she had to be physically restrained from throwing a drink at Norma, convinced that she had done it purely to steal the spotlight. And honestly, maybe she had. Norma wasn't just an actress. She was a strategist. She knew that in a room full of Hollywood's elite, blending in meant being forgotten. Wearing red wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a statement. A way of reminding everyone that despite all the newcomers, despite the rising stars, despite the whispers that her best days were behind her, she was still the Norma Shearer. The incident became the stuff of legend. Some even believe it inspired key moments in classic films, particularly the red dress scenes in Jezebel, 1938, and Gone with the Wind, 1939. Whether that's true or not, one thing was certain. Norma had once again proven that she knew exactly how to make an impact. She might have had enemies, but she also had something far more valuable, the ability to stay relevant in an industry that thrived on forgetting. Marriage. For all the ambition, strategy, and resilience that defined Norma Shearer's career, her personal life, especially her marriages, played just as significant a role in shaping her legacy. Unlike many actresses of her time, who were often caught up in high-profile scandals or fleeting romances, Norma's love life was marked by two vastly different relationships, one that cemented her power in Hollywood and another that allowed her to leave it behind entirely, Her first and most famous marriage was to Irving Thalberg, the legendary producer, often referred to as the boy wonder of Hollywood. Thalberg was not just another studio executive. He was the driving force behind MGM's success, the man who built the studio into the most prestigious powerhouse of the Golden Age. He was brilliant, ambitious, and respected by everyone in the industry. And yet, despite his status, he was deeply private, intensely serious, and rarely interested in Hollywood's social scene. In many ways, he was the opposite of Norma, who thrived on glamour, attention, and the art of reinvention. But perhaps that was what made them work so well together. Their romance wasn't an impulsive whirlwind affair, like so many other Hollywood marriages. It was calculated, strategic, even a little unexpected. While Thalberg had always been impressed by Norma's talent, she had to actively pursue him, making sure she remained in his orbit professionally and personally. And when it became clear that their relationship was more than just a passing flirtation, Norma made a bold decision. She converted to Judaism so she could marry him. In an era when interfaith marriages were rare and controversial, this was no small gesture. It was a declaration of commitment, not just to Thalberg, but to the life he had built. Their wedding, held on September 29, 1927, was nothing short of a Hollywood spectacle. Lavish, star-studded, and the talk of the town, it was a perfect reflection of their status as MGM's golden couple. But despite the grandeur, their marriage was, at its core, a partnership, one built on mutual respect, ambition, and an understanding that they were stronger together than apart. Norma wasn't just Thalberg's wife, she was his equal. While he shaped MGM behind the scenes, she reigned on screen, ensuring that the studio remained dominant. Together they had 2 children, Irving Thalberg Jr., born in 1930, and Catherine Thalberg, born in 1935. Though motherhood was never the center of Norma's public identity, she embraced it, balancing her career with her growing family. But just as she reached the height of her career, tragedy struck. In 1936, Irving Thalberg fell ill with pneumonia. His health had always been fragile. He had suffered from heart issues since childhood, and many in Hollywood knew that he worked himself to exhaustion. Despite Norma's desperate efforts to get him the best medical care available, he passed away at just 37 years old. It was a devastating loss, not just for Norma, but for the entire film industry. Without Thalberg, Norma was lost. Professionally, she struggled. Without his influence, she found herself increasingly sidelined at MGM. Personally, she was grieving not just her husband, but the man who had helped shape her career. She withdrew from the Hollywood scene, taking time to raise her children and reflect on what her next steps would be. And while she did return to acting for a few more years, something had changed. The drive, the hunger that had once defined her seemed to fade. By the early 1940s, Norma had stepped away from the spotlight, and in 1942, she made a decision that shocked Hollywood. She remarried. But this time, it wasn't to another powerful studio executive or a famous leading man. Instead, she chose Martin Arouge, a ski instructor with no ties to the film industry. It was a move that baffled many. Why would a woman who had been at the pinnacle of Hollywood royalty suddenly leave it all behind for a quiet, private life? But for Norma, it made perfect sense. She had lived through the ruthless world of show business, navigated its politics, and survived its pressures. And after everything, she was ready for something simpler. With Martin, she fully retired from public life. Unlike many of her contemporaries who clung to Hollywood even as the industry moved on without them, Norma walked away on her own terms. She avoided interviews, skipped Hollywood events, and chose to live in near anonymity. Some saw it as a sad ending. a once great star fading into obscurity. But perhaps it was the happiest ending of all. She had played the game, won, and then decided to leave on her own accord. After years of fighting for recognition, proving herself and reinventing her image, she no longer needed Hollywood to define her, and in a way, that made her one of the most powerful figures of them all. 6. Other relationships. After Irving Thalberg's death, Norma Shearer found herself in an unfamiliar position, alone. For nearly a decade, she had been part of Hollywood's most powerful couple, protected by Thalberg's influence and status. But now, she was a widow at just 34 years old, left to navigate an industry that was rapidly changing without her greatest ally. And while she had once been the queen of MGM, her throne was no longer secure. As younger actresses rose to prominence, Norma's future in Hollywood became uncertain. In her grief, she sought companionship, but in true Norma Shearer fashion, even her romantic entanglements came with controversy. In the years following Thalberg's passing, Norma was briefly linked to James Stewart, one of Hollywood's most beloved leading men. The relationship, however, was fleeting. Some say it was a genuine romance, while others believe it was nothing more than a brief distraction for a woman still mourning the loss of her husband. Either way, it didn't last. But if her time with Stewart was forgettable, her next relationship was anything but. Enter George Raft, a tough-talking, sharp-dressed actor known for playing gangsters on screen and living like one off-screen. Norma and Raft's affair was scandalous for one glaring reason. He was already married. Though his marriage was reportedly on the rocks, he was still legally bound to his wife, and Hollywood's biggest studio wasn't about to let one of its most respected actresses become entangled in such a messy situation. MGM had built Norma's image as a sophisticated, elegant leading lady, an actress with class. Being associated with Raft, a man rumored to have ties to actual mobsters, threatened to ruin that reputation. The studio wasn't subtle about their disapproval. They issued an ultimatum: end the affair or risk her contract. It was a stark reminder that despite all of Norma's success, she was still at the mercy of the studio system. She had spent years proving that she was more than just Thalberg's wife, but in the end, MGM still treated her as if she only had value as long as she fit their carefully curated image. Under intense pressure, she ended the relationship, but the damage had already been done. As if her troubles with MGM weren't enough, Norma soon found herself embroiled in a bitter legal battle with the studio itself. After Thalberg's death, she expected to receive a fair share of the profits from the films he had produced. After all, these were movies that had made MGM millions, many of them starring Norma herself. But instead of honoring her late husband's contributions, the studio pushed back. They weren't willing to give her what she believed was rightfully hers. And Norma, never one to back down, decided to fight. She hired a team of powerful lawyers and took MGM to court. This was a risky move. Few actors dared to publicly challenge the studios that controlled their careers. But Norma had nothing left to lose. She had already been sidelined at MGM, her influence fading with each passing year. If she couldn't win on the screen anymore, she would win in the courtroom. The legal battle became a very public dispute, and while Norma eventually secured some financial compensation, the victory came at a cost. Her relationship with MGM was permanently severed. The studio that had once built her up as their shining star had now effectively cast her aside. With no allies left in the system and no desire to grovel for roles, she walked away from Hollywood. 7th, death. For decades, Norma Shearer had been the woman who defied expectations, shattered stereotypes, and commanded the silver screen with elegance and ambition. But by the time she reached the final chapter of her life, Hollywood had long since moved on. Unlike many of her contemporaries who fought desperately to cling to fame, Norma chose a different path. She disappeared. After retiring from acting in the early 1940s, she withdrew from the public eye almost completely. She refused interviews, declined invitations to Hollywood events, and deliberately distanced herself from the industry that had once worshipped her. To younger generations of actors and audiences, she became a ghost of the past, a name from the golden age that few still spoke of. While some might have viewed this as a tragic ending, for Norma it was a conscious choice. She had played the Hollywood game, conquered it, and when the time came, she walked away on her own terms. Her later years, however, were marked by declining health. She suffered from near blindness, a cruel twist of fate, for a woman whose eyes had once been scrutinized so intensely by directors and photographers. On top of that, she developed dementia, a condition that slowly erased the memories of the extraordinary life she had lived. The sharp, ambitious woman who had once outmaneuvered powerful studio executives and outshone her rivals now found herself retreating further into obscurity. Then, in 1982, at the age of 80, Norma Shearer passed away due to bronchopneumonia. She had spent the last decades of her life away from the limelight, but in the end, she made one final statement, a silent but powerful one. She was buried beside Irving Thalberg, the man who had shaped her career, her life, and in many ways, her legacy. It was a decision that spoke volumes. Despite everything, the rivalries, the scandals, the reinventions, her story would forever be intertwined with his. And yet, Norma Shearer was not forgotten. In 1960, she was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a permanent reminder of the empire she had built. Decades later, something remarkable happened. Her films were rediscovered. Thanks to Turner Classic Movies, TCM, a new generation of audiences and critics began to reevaluate her work. The bold, modern, pre-code performances that had once scandalized audiences were now seen as revolutionary. The proper, sophisticated image that some had mocked was understood for what it really was, a carefully crafted power move in an industry that had never been designed for ambitious women. Today, Norma Shearer is recognized not just as an actress, but as a pioneer. A woman who played the game better than anyone, who refused to let Hollywood define her, and who left at the height of her own choosing. She may have spent her final years in silence, but her legacy still speaks volumes. Norma Shearer's contributions to cinema continue to inspire generations of actors and film lovers alike. Her bold choices, both on and off the screen, helped pave the way for strong, independent female characters in Hollywood. What's your favorite Norma Shearer film? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look into classic Hollywood history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.